Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room Update. We are on day number 125 of the war with the terrorists in the Gaza Strip. It started back then on the 7th of October with the massacre of 1,200 people and the taking of 240 hostages, both Israelis and foreigners. Some of them are still being kept hostage by the terrorists in the Gaza Strip. Since then, the Israeli forces have been operating extensively in Gaza. And really, what we're going to discuss today, later on, is how those forces are actually winning the war. Yes, that's right. Israel is winning that war. We've managed to clear out most of the terrorist infrastructure from the northern Gaza Strip. We've now been operating extensively in the central and southern areas of the Gaza Strip, going through really tremendous areas, blowing up thousands of tunnels and tunnel shafts, exposing them to the world, kilometers of tunnels under the Gaza Strip, a tunnel system that was longer even than the tunnel system in the underground system in London. There it serves over 12 million people. In Gaza, it served just a few thousand terrorists because that tunnel system wasn't there for all of the Gazan population, as the leaders of Hamas have said. That tunnel system was only there for the terrorists and for the terrorists to hold Israeli hostages. That's what we've seen coming out in the last few days. Kilometers of tunnels underneath the town of Khan Yunis, and in those tunnels, special areas for the terrorists to pass the time and for the Israeli hostages to be held behind bars as if they were properly in a prison. That's what we've been seeing. That's what they've been building. That's what they've been spending millions and millions of dollars developing and building over the last 10 to 15 years. Now, this isn't a small feat. This is quite an engineering success. Gaza is just off the coast, and any construction there, definitely construction that goes underground, is not a simple thing to do. That's what they've managed to do with engineering equipment that they've brought in from Egypt, smuggled through the tunnels with or without Egypt's knowledge. That's what they've managed to build. And the IDF forces have been working above ground, underground, from the sea, from the air, really trying to get through all of that entire web of the terrorist infrastructure. And we've been succeeding. 20 of the 24 battalions of Hamas have been destroyed. 4 out of the 5 divisions have been destroyed. Most of their platoons have been destroyed. As Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said last night, we've killed, injured, or captured over 20,000 of these terrorists. That's a huge number. It's just 4 months in. 125 days, it's just over 4 months. Last night, Prime Minister Netanyahu compared that, as have other military experts, to the US efforts in Mosul. There, it took 9 months for the American forces, a much larger force, to overcome just 5,000 soldiers, 5,000 terrorists. This is a different story. On the ground, Israel is winning this war, and substantially. There is very little resistance. We've managed to destroy 95% of the capabilities of Hamas to fire rockets, which still leaves them 5%. And we had that 5% reminder today as those terrorists again fired indiscriminate rockets into Sderot and into the areas around the Gaza envelope. But the IDF forces are continuing on. They're almost finished in Khan Yunis. I say that cautiously, of course, because there is still a lot to do, but a lot of the population of Khan Yunis has left. The IDF forces that are there are now moving in to the commando forces. They're moving in slowly but surely, surrounding every terrorist that's left there, every part of the terrorist infrastructure, closing in and destroying. That's what's happening. We're left with really one main Gazan city called Rafah on the southern border that also has the border with Egypt. There we have not small difficulties that we're still going to have to encounter, but certainly that is the last of the bastions of Hamas. And once we get through Khan Yunis, once we destroy the capabilities of Khan Yunis, Khan Yunis is the hometown of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza. Once we destroy that and move further south, Hamas is broken. They're already broken, but it will further expand that military success. In the north, we're continuing on fighting. Hezbollah is continuing on with its war of attrition, also today firing rockets into Israel's north, Israel responding. We've killed 170 of the Hezbollah terrorists already. They fired over 2,000 rockets and anti-tank missiles, including missiles and rockets fired today. There's extensive damage in the north. There's 100,000 Israelis who have been displaced from the north. No one's talking about them in the international community. No one's talking about the Israelis that have been forced out of their homes already for 4 months. All they're concerned about is the humanitarian aid going to the Gazans and the terrorists who take that humanitarian aid and commandeer it as part of their war effort. In Judea and Samaria today, we've also seen a continuation of the terror attacks. This morning, we saw a Palestinian Authority officer in their security forces carrying out a shooting attack against Israeli forces. I mean, this is like unbelievable. Yesterday, we saw Secretary of State Antony Blinken meeting with President Mahmoud Abbas, releasing a statement that was almost positive that the United States still supports the two-state solution, supports a revitalized Palestinian Authority. This morning, Mahmoud Abbas responded as one of his security forces trained, supported, and funded by the US government. Even today, after the Taylor Force Act, they still pass about $61 million of aid to the Palestinian Authority every year. Security forces of the PA, trained and funded by the US, responded to Secretary Blinken by shooting at Israeli soldiers. That's something which really can't be taken lightly in any way, shape, or form. In Israel as well, we've seen relative calm, so there's nothing more to add really on that scale. We've seen actually quite a lot of movement towards and buses moving towards Jerusalem. Tonight, tomorrow is the start of the month. That's when also the Muslims have the idea of also coming to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and going up onto the Temple Mount. So we've seen movement in that direction as well. Everything happens there as it's been happening for the last 4 months, relatively quietly. This idea of Hamas calling the massacre the Al-Aqsa Mosque flood, as if to imply that Israel was doing something negative to the mosque and that they were coming to be the defenders, has completely failed. It hasn't managed to bring about that tremendous tsunami of support which they believed it would, and that's where we're standing. What I'm going to discuss today with our special guest today is Yifa Segal. Yifa is an expert in international law. She was the founder of the International Law Forum, an organization that had hundreds, thousands of lawyers from around the world, all working together to support Israel and to support the Israeli and Zionistic project. That was something which Yifa started. She then left to be the chief of staff to Israel's ambassador to the United States, and then and is now back in Israel and is the managing director of Chetz. And what we're going to discuss today with Yifa, both using her political background, her legal background, and really just her involvement in all Israel things for many, many years now, is the difference between what I described at the beginning and what's going on in the world. What I described at the beginning is Israel is winning the war on the ground. Now, you don't need me to say that to you. For anyone who reads the Wall Street Journal, I recommend that you read an article published just 3 days ago under the title of Israel's Untold Gaza Progress. It starts with these words: "You may have missed it amid the media defeatism, but Israel is winning its war in Gaza. Hamas's losses are mounting, and support for the Israeli war effort has endured around the world longer than Hamas expected." That's exactly the point. Hamas expected the war to be short, for the international community to move in and close us down quickly as it has done before. And that hasn't really happened. But there's a difference nonetheless between winning the war on the ground and winning the war of public opinion. And that's where I'd like to discuss that delta with Yifa. Yifa, thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving us from your time.
Well, Morris, whenever you ask, I show up. So I don't even ask questions. So happy to be with you.
That's amazing, Yifa. Thank you. Just give us a little bit of an idea of what's going on. I would like to really break down our discussion today to the internal Israeli scene, and then to foreign opinion. In Israel, what we've seen really over the last period of time is two different approaches. One approach of Israel's losing, we can't win this war, we'll never be able to defeat Hamas, we'll never be able to get into the tunnels, and so on and so forth. And on the other side, the voices that we're hearing from our reservists, from people who don't necessarily follow the mainstream media, but are really more connected to what's actually happening on the ground, rather than, as the Wall Street Journal described it, the defeatism, and see that we're winning. The forces on the ground are united. The political divisions that we saw before the war have ended, and left-wing, right-wing, supporters of the judicial reform and objectors are all fighting for one cause, to defeat Hamas. How, nonetheless, are we seeing those two different sides?
Yeah, well, I think it's an incredibly important topic, and I'll tell you why. First of all, I've been dedicating my time, over a decade now to fighting the infrastructure of terrorism, the funding of terrorism across the world, and delegitimization efforts of Israel and the rise of anti-Semitism. And we've been doing that, basically 24/7 since October 7th. There's a lot of goodwill now that wasn't there before October 7th, unfortunately. But now we see, like a renaissance of Israelis understanding the need to come out and do this. Some of the international community, not so much in the streets and in the universities, but more so in the governments. You see, European governments are now more cooperative than ever. Really, we've been achieving so much, shutting down channels of funding for Hamas, for Hezbollah, raising awareness for a lot of their activities domestically in Western countries. But still, I want to come back to the point that you raised. I think that everything starts at home. Everything starts with our understanding of who we are, what we are doing, why we are fighting the war, why we are here in Israel, why this is so crucial, and also be very knowledgeable about the fact about having a strong spirit, and this is a concern to me, and I want to give you an example. Going back to the Yom Kippur War. So the Yom Kippur War, I mean, we've all known about the failures of intelligence and the struggles and the very, very difficult few days. We all know that they were thinking about starting to dig big holes to bury the population, that they thought a second Holocaust was coming. And so after a few days, as we all know, everything was turned around. The military success of the IDF in the Yom Kippur War was astonishing. This war was our victory, the way that we have kind of turned the tide and were able to reach almost every capital city around our Arab neighbors, have been studied in military academies around the world. And yet, for 50 plus years, the Israelis have been walking around feeling like we've lost the Yom Kippur War. All that you hear about before every Yom Kippur is about the intelligence failure, is about the people that were lost. It's about the failures of the Yom Kippur War. But there is no celebration alongside understanding and researching and inquiring about what kind of failures and what mistakes were made. There is no celebration of the victory, of the tremendous spirit, of the tremendous effort, of the tremendous success that was done by the IDF and by the Israeli people on the Yom Kippur War. And I think, and I'm concerned that the same thing is happening now. So yes, there are a lot of pain that comes with this war. I mean, October 7th was, there are no words to describe how horrific it is. We all know at least somebody that was killed or injured or kidnapped. We have soldiers that unfortunately are killed in the war in Gaza still, and there are still over 100 people kidnapped, held by Hamas in Gaza. But the Israeli population, for some reason, is focused tremendously on that, and not so much. Look at our media, for example. I mean, you see the vast part of the coverage of the war is turned to these aspects of the war, to the pain and the suffering and the strife of a lot of the Israelis that are experiencing because of the war. But there is no effort to really discuss. I mean, most Israelis don't know what you and I know and what your audience knows, which is the amazing military progress in Gaza, the amazing achievements, the spirit, the unity that is portrayed. And I think, Maurice, I think it's one of our, it's very, very important for us to, to be the ones who keep on talking about it and saying it and stressing how important it is to educate our own people, because everything starts at home. If we are not aware of our enemies, if we're not aware of how things are developing on the ground, if we don't, if we're not fed by this amazing spirits of our soldiers in Gaza and the military success, then we are doomed to fail, because mostly wars are won not because one side has been able to kill all the soldiers on the other side. And wars are won when one of the sides are tired of fighting, lost any hope, their spirit is broken, and then they surrender. And so as long as we keep our spirits high and we understand that we're winning and we understand that that's the most important thing, I'm very optimistic about how this will end.
Within Israel, it appears to be, Yifa, that you're suggesting that it's really just a question of self-flagellation. We have that tendency to be overcritical of ourselves, to focus only on the idea of the really the tremendous failure of our intelligence on the 7th of October, on the failure of the IDF forces to immediately repel the attack. Something which is really almost impossible to expect. Really, the rules of war say that the front line, the first line of defense, will always be broken. That's just one of these really truisms of the war. That's how wars start, because one side identifies the weakness of the other, concentrates all its forces there, and then bursts through. That's really the start of war. So that expectation that we would be able to constantly uphold the border, constantly keep out the Hamas, constantly be able to identify any type of intention to cross the border, is something which really isn't a reasonable expectation. Similar to the 1973, similar to the Yom Kippur War, there were indications. We sort of rejected them. We sort of downplayed them. We understood only when it was too late that this is real and it's actually going to happen. And as you said, the military success is studied all over the world today. The operation led by Ariel Sharon in the south, crossing the Suez Canal, dividing between the Egyptian armies, cutting them off with their backs towards the Suez Canal, and then opening up towards Cairo, was truly a military maneuver that's studied around the world. And similarly today, the successes of the IDF forces dealing with the above ground, with the terrorists above ground, the subterranean area, all of this is something which militarily is a tremendous success. But you think it's only attributable to self-criticism, that there is this defeatist movement, or is there some other underlying current, do you think, that's still there? Is it still this whole pre-October 7 war that's going on, at least in the press, that was so invested in that idea of, well, we should do everything and anything, no matter what, just to depose Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think we're in a different place. Definitely, there are a few of those who are still in that mindset and care about don't really care a lot about anything else. But I think the vast majority of Israelis have really, this really shook a lot of people. And from my conversations with people, um, nationalism is now back in style. I mean, the Israeli flag is raised everywhere. I mean, even here in the city of Tel Aviv, there are Israeli flags on cars and from balconies, and you see in all the media channels, the Israeli flag is really back in style. And there's a feeling of closeness, and there is, I think, a true desire to see something different happening in the Israeli society, to see unities, to see success, to see, to never encounter such divides as we have in the earlier in 2023 before October 7th. So I want to tell you something. I think that we need to take responsibility for how, we inform our people and how we educate our children. So, unfortunately, even before October 7th, you say that there was we all know that there was mistakes made by our intelligence. That's very obvious. But the question is, what did most of our people even know about the enemies that live so close to us, about Hamas, about the Palestinian Authority, about Iran, about Hezbollah? What did most people even know? Where do you go to get information? Who is feeding you this information? To even understand that that Hamas is such a death cult, that they're capable. Most people here didn't even realize that Hamas is capable. I'm not even talking about whether they will achieve what they want to achieve, but that they're capable of raping and murdering and torturing and burning babies alive and so on and so forth. And so there's a big problem with how our own people are not receiving the information that they should be receiving. So I think there was a poll that was done maybe a week ago, and I think 60-something% of Israelis said the question was, do you think we're winning the war? And the answer, 60-something% said no. So, given the fact that I believe, all Israelis wants to see IDF's success in Gaza and elsewhere, there is definitely a major gap in information. And I think we're all responsible for that. And I know you've been doing this. You've been doing a daily briefing, right, since the beginning of the war, almost the beginning of the war. I've been going and lecturing to audiences. I've never thought of myself, coming and like I had the other day. I was invited to speak to marketing directors of firms in Israel. They want to know about the background of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They want to understand the movement of the delegitimization of Israel. They want to know for the first time ever. This is very intelligent, very successful people. How we came, to this point. And I was so grateful. I come wherever I'm invited. I do talk sometimes in the middle of the night, and I think this is where we are. People don't get the right information, and I'm concerned about that effect as a major factor in Israeli unity and Israeli success. And I think we all need to learn from our reservists. My brother was fighting in Khan Yunis. He was just released a week ago exactly. And, he comes home and he tells me, we had people from all parts of the Israeli society, right? We had religious people and secular people and Haredis and left wing and right wing and people from kibbutzim and from the north and from the center. And we all found common ground. We're all fighting with the highest morale possible. We all know what we're doing there. We all see our success on the ground, and this is, I think, a model for what we would like to see, Israel going forward. And my main message is that we're all responsible for that.
I think that's something that we're hearing really from all of the different reservists coming out of Gaza. That idea of the unity of this one common cause that they found, that manages to put aside all of the previous differences. And just so that our audience understands, we're talking about reservists that sometimes are spending 24 and 36 hours inside a big metal box. It's called an armored personnel carrier, and you're moving forward. You're there all the time. You don't even always get a chance to leave just to see the sun or just to see the sky. You're in this box moving forward. That's the way you're living. And you're there with another 5, 6 people. It's very, very close quarters, and either that or you're running along the ground, you're running through the mud, you're running through the sand. Everyone around you is doing the same thing. That's the understanding that people need to have of what's going on there. Going from house to house, your basic requirement is that you rely really for dear life on the person in front of you and the person behind you, and everyone in that chain of succession is really doing the same thing. So you develop that unity. That's the bonds of this war situation, and that's what's really creating the unity there. But it seems to be continuing on even afterwards, because now we're no longer divided. The best way, obviously, to get over our internal divides is to put us all in a room together, or all in a metal box together, where we just have to fight it out and get over it. And that's what we, at least to a great extent, appear to have done. So let's put aside Yifa, because unfortunately these programs are far too limited in time. We only have 45 minutes for now, and so we need to discuss also the wider world opinion. What's going on in the world? Where is Israel standing there? How are we doing? Are we managing to really maintain that support internationally? We've seen not a small amount of criticism from the Biden administration, from Secretary Blinken, saying, well, Israel has to make sure that it does more to limit the civilian casualties. That's something which is almost impossible in the urban environment in which we're fighting hand-to-hand combat with the terrorists using civilians as their human shield, and where they've embedded themselves in that urban population. So that's on the one side. The Europeans, Joseph Borrell also has been calling for an end, calling for a ceasefire, calling for Israel to allow Hamas to survive, to live another day, for Yifa Segal to be able to come out from his little rat hole above ground as the commanding victor, to say, I've lived to see another day, even after I murdered 1,200 people and took hundreds hostage.
It's worse than that, Morris. It's for him to live another day to fulfill his promise, which is to commit another massacre like October 7th, which he said, numerous times after the massacre.
More and more. So how are the Europeans supporting that?
Look, so it's very hard to say. I used to be in closed sessions, and then you've been in some in your career as well. And sometimes you hear completely different things. When there's no camera rolling and it's not a press release, and it's very hard to say sometimes what is lip service and what is their actual opinion. And so, the Biden administration is obviously interested in seeing Hamas being wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, there's nothing for the Americans to support Hamas, and they've been very clear about this. On the other hand, they have a very hard time with their public opinion, especially their constituencies, a portion of their constituency in the Democratic Party. And so I think, the Biden administration really wants this to look as nice as possible. I mean, obviously it's warfare and there's nothing pleasant about it. But I think he's trying to push us into making it look as nice as possible, while also making statements that appeal to his, to some of his voter base. There is no way to unfortunately, right, to conduct warfare in a nice, pleasant way. There's no way to make it sterile. I mean, just to look at what the Americans have, quote unquote, achieved in terms of civilian casualties in Afghanistan, in Iraq. You've discussed earlier the specific Battle of Mosul, which was horrible. It took them, if I'm not mistaken, 9 months to take over one city with a relatively greater amount of casualties, both on the military side, on the American or the Allied side, and also on the civilian front. So the Americans, whoever, if you sit down in a room and talk to generals who have some kind of experience in warfare, they will tell you exactly what that Wall Street Journal article said. You guys are doing amazing work. How did you do it? How did you do it so well? How is it possible that the number of casualties on your end is so relatively small? Not to say that we're not crying and bleeding for every life that is lost, but relatively very, very small. How are you achieving to advance, in such rapid speed? How is it that you're doing this with this unprecedented amount of underground tunnels and piers and the underground fighting and infrastructure? So they know this. This is not something that the Biden administration doesn't know. But there's a great problem for us in terms of public opinion. I can talk about the fact that first of all, us as Israelis, I mean, we weren't doing a very good job before October 7th either. And if just to go back to what I was saying, if most Israelis don't even know the background of what is going on, and they can't be ambassadors for what is going on, so what do you expect the world to think about you? So on that end, I think we're doing much better now, and I think it's growing and expanding. And there are a lot more Israelis and a lot more Jews that are active on this front, and this is super important. Another issue that I think the West needs to deal with, it's bigger than Israel, but it's the level of infiltration that foreign entities, that bad actors had in their to Western indoctrination processes. Basically, I mean, if you just look at what is going on in universities, it's now known that the Qataris, or even, by the way, I don't know if you've seen this, but even the Palestinian authorities have contributed money to American universities. The Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria has contributed millions of dollars to fund universities in the United States. What do you think that tells you? I mean, that tells you that they understand exactly what they're doing, and that they're willing to invest serious funding in the indoctrination process of Americans to be anti-America or anti-Western values and agendas. Also, same thing goes for social media. So you have a platform that is democratic, that is dominated by non-democratic individuals, because it's open globally, and often the people who are doing the vetting for posts or tweets or whatever you want to call them are coming from non-democratic parties, and it's a big part of the the anti-Western and as a part of it, the anti-Israeli indoctrination process that we all need to take into account and to take very, very seriously.
So I understand the idea of these foreign dictatorships trying and to a great extent, as you described it, succeeding to influence the discussion in the United States. What I can less understand is why, and I obviously understand the basic politics of it, but why the US administration would buy into that. Surely they must have seen that 30 years of appeasing the terrorists as part of the Oslo process has brought us no closer to peace. We're actually further now away from peace than we ever were before with the Palestinians. On the other hand, as we proved 4 years ago, we actually are closer to peace and normalization with the Arab countries around us. The Abraham Accords were a massive step forward just prior to the October 7 massacre. We were deep in discussion about normalization with Saudi Arabia, which would have helped to bring really a band of peace from the Arabian Sea all the way through to the Atlantic, through North Africa. Something substantial. And yet now the same administration, to cater to the opinion of the anti-Western, anti-US forces influenced by these dictatorships that have been throwing around too much money, seems to be buying back into that same old platitude of, well, we can't go any further with any type of peace agreement until Israel gives in and surrenders to the terrorists. That's something which I nonetheless find hard to understand, how from a logical point of view they can justify that, or is it all just about politics?
That's a good question, because I can tell you what I've heard in meetings when I was in Washington in 2021. I have been wondering if they've changed their mind since then, right? Because in 2021 they really think that giving the Iranians some money, international statute, respect, blah 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 blah, would eventually bring them closer to the West and get them to forsake their ideology. I don't even think they believe that it's an ideological movement so much, and they thought they can just basically bribe them into being more Western and more capitalist and more and to forsake their goals to destroy America and the U.S. I've been wondering if they still think that, because the Biden administration was willing to put a lot of efforts and a lot on the line to advance the normalization with Saudi Arabia before October 7th, and I'm sure the Saudis are not asking for anything less now that they're back in the that this is back on the table, because you can see that the Biden administration is doing everything in its power not to say that they're fighting Iran, that Iran is actually, the culpable in all of this. That Israel is not fighting Hamas. I mean, we're fighting Hamas as a part of a greater war. It's not a cold war; it's a very hot war, right? I mean, Iran is using its proxies in Lebanon and in Syria, and in, of course, the Gaza Strip, and in Yemen, the Houthis, and in Judea and Samaria, and the Iranians are also shooting at the Americans. They're shooting at the American bases in Iraq and Syria, and they're shooting at the Americans in the Red Sea. The Houthis are shooting at the Americans, and of course other allied forces as well that are in the region in the Red Sea. And yet, it's amazing to me that the Biden administration would not come out publicly directly and say we are in a war with Iran. They're doing everything possible not to say that. And so the one explanation that I have for that is that this is an election year, and this would be a major problem for the Biden administration to say that we have advanced diplomatic solution with the Iranians, including giving them millions and millions of dollars throughout the year from the Obama era until just recently. And so to now acknowledge that this failed and they need to basically, they don't need to launch a war, they are already in war with Iran, would be a major political problem for them. So, I think at the end of the day, this is probably at least a major factor in what is going on, coming from Washington these days.
But don't the American population and public see that happening anyway? You're seeing the war in going on in the Middle East. You're seeing American assets being attacked. You're seeing American bases being attacked by Iran directly, by the Iranian proxies. For how long can the administration say, well, we're not in this war with Iran? They started off really the Biden administration started off with the idea of re-entering the JCPOA, the longer and stronger nuclear deal with Iran, which to their credit, I must say, quickly left the table. It didn't progress onwards.
Because it quickly left the table. It took a few years, but yeah, eventually they moved to the
But eventually they understood, and which is why we've seen no discussion on that subject, maybe already for the last year, that there's no idea of moving forward with that. There was the alternative route where they agreed to pay some $6 billion in order to release some American hostages, but really that drive towards a nuclear deal, which really wouldn't have held any more water than the previous one. We saw that really tapering off, and now we're seeing an open war, and that's something which you can't hide. You can't put it in the closet and say it's not happening. And this idea all the time, I have this idea of appeasement, of this picture of Neville Chamberlain getting off the plane from his meeting with Hitler and waving his white paper and saying, well, there's going to be peace in our time. And then there's a world war.
Yeah.
Is that where Biden is standing on the precipice of this massive war, which they're trying to dissuade themselves that is actually happening?
I have to tell you, I have to challenge your statement on, everyone can see it. This is unfortunately, I don't know that that's true. I mean, I've did this thing right? Since the beginning of the war, whenever I speak to an American colleague, I ask them, did you see anything about, how American bases were attacked in Syria and Iraq today in the news? And most of the time they said no. They have no idea. I mean, even if it's being reported on most or at least a big part of the media outlets in the U.S., it's downplayed. So some militias have attacked, and it's not a big deal, and we're striking back, and it's being downplayed. So I'm not sure. I mean, I challenge what your statement that is very logical, but the world is not very logical, especially when it comes to politics, and especially when it comes to Israel. So I really wonder if most Americans even realize that the empire of the United States is being attacked on a daily basis for almost 4 months now straight by the Iranians, and there's absolutely, I mean, not absolutely no response, but very little response, and I don't think they know that.
That's it's unbelievable to hear that you can actually manage to hide a war that's happening from the American public, even in this day and time of internet, of immediate access to world news. That's just something which is hard to really comprehend. But as you say, it probably is the case, and not everyone is as glued to the news channels as Israelis are, and we just assume that that's just the standard that's applied across the world. Clearly, that's not the case.
We're making a lot of mistakes on that. I mean, when we talk about the war, I don't know, generally speaking, Israelis are very active now, as we said earlier. We're not framing it as a war against Iran. We're not doing a good job in explaining to ourselves first and foremost, but then also to the rest of the world who is listening when they're listening, that this is a much greater war. That our messaging is focusing almost solely on Hamas, which is important. Obviously, the world needs to know that this is a crazy jihadist death cult. But it's not. When we frame it as just Israel versus Hamas, then we're not doing our part in making sure that people understand what the bigger picture is. So I also think we need to put an emphasis on that.
I think for Israelis, it's also a little bit more understood that this is a wider spectrum than just Hamas, because we also have the war that's going on in the north. If with your permission, I'd like to just address maybe two of our questions that have come up during the session, or really statements rather than questions. The first one was from Judith, that said it's really shocking to hear that Israelis, experts or not, could not imagine that Hamas, which carried out the gruesome suicide bombings, could do things as bad or as worse. So on that level, it's important that people understand the week before, just the week before the October 7 massacre, there was a discussion in Israel's cabinet. It's been reported about extensively. The predominant or the dominant idea that was presented there was that Hamas is deterred. Hamas is not going to open a war. Hamas is not looking for a new escalation of the violence. What they're looking for is to provide for the Gazans. And what Israel needs to do is to open its gates to thousands more Gazans who would come in, work in Israel, improve their own financial situation, improve the financial situation of those around them. And that's the way to deal with it. That was the professional opinion that was presented by the security forces just a week before the discussion. On the one hand, on the other hand, this is for you, Judith, really, and for others who are asking that same question. I actually wrote a paper just 3 weeks before the 21st of September, explaining that there was about to be a massive war from Gaza. It was clear as the sun coming up in the morning. And that's these two different opinions that you see and that you hear all the time. So how even do you explain that? The military echelons on the one hand saying, well, the Gazans, Hamas, are deterred, and we on the other hand being able to see what's clearly in front of us, that these people are murderers. I explained it just before you give your answer, Yifa, in one of the interviews that I gave actually to a Sri Lankan think tank, where I said that the failure of Israel's intelligence was based on one basic faulty premise, that we care more about the Gazan population than Hamas did. And we thought that Hamas cared about them as well, but they don't. And that was our failure.
I think our failure was greater than that. I think that a big part of the Israeli population really believed in the Palestinian narrative, that all they want is independence. They want a state. They are oppressed. They are occupied, and most of the population are peace-loving, hippies, and it's all good. If it wasn't for the government, we could all just sit down together and kumbaya, kumbaya, peace and love. And so when I say we have a problem with explaining things to our own people, that's first and foremost what I mean. So if most Israelis don't understand that the Palestinians, whether it's under Hamas or under the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria, are indoctrinated in all aspects of their lives from the day they are born. From kindergarten to children's movies and TV shows, to salaries that are being paid, pay for slay, to all kinds of mechanism, all aspects of their lives. Then and most Israelis, Maurice, I have to tell you, they didn't know this before October 7th. This is why they were surprised. There's no way that a normal person, that is living a good life in a Western country, can even comprehend how someone can come to hate you when they don't even know you, to hate you so much that they can burn your baby alive while you're sitting there watching. And the only way to explain this to people, to have them anticipate something so horrible can come from these neighbors of ours, is to first let them know that there are such processes of indoctrination, that there is really such hatred coming from the population in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. And we failed at that. And so now I hope that we will understand how important it is to talk about these things and not assume that they will learn it somehow.
That's something which really is, I think, one of these basic ideas of understanding what's going on the Palestinian side, understanding what's going on there, who they are, what they're learning, what they're being taught, and what their leadership is teaching them, is a fundamental part of really understanding that picture. And for that, I can only recommend that our audience go to the site of Palestinian Media Watch, where I used to work as well, to NGO Monitor, where I used to also work, to the side of Impact SE. Read about the school books, read about what these kids the Gazan kids are being taught, the kids in Judea and Samaria are being taught by the Palestinian Authority, by their leadership. When you understand and really comprehend what they're being taught, you can then easily or more easily understand why they are so violent towards Israel and why they hate us so much. That would be something which is really really very much of an eye opener. So that was one question. The article that I mentioned before for our audience, if anyone wants to look it up, look up Maurice Hirsch, the 2023-2024 Gaza terror campaign that I wrote and published on the 21st of September, 3 weeks before the massacre, unfortunately. And our second question that we had, or second comment that we had, is, well, how can we even expect international support when we have no diplomatic initiative? Now, we've had diplomatic initiatives for the last 30 years. They might have gone in the wrong way. We might have believed in Oslo, that was a complete failure, but we're not short of diplomatic initiatives. So why is the world still, and also from our audience, what diplomatic initiative is there left to suggest to the Palestinians that they haven't already rejected? We've offered them a state. We've offered them a state in more land than the pre-1967 lines, what they call borders, that weren't really borders. That's what Ehud Olmert did in 2008, as attested to by Saeb Erekat. What else can we offer the Palestinians that we haven't already given them in order to appease them. Is there anything else?
No, I think I think the key issue here is indoctrination. I think as long as the population is being raised to to hate as much as they do, and that the most important thing, the best thing that a young boy or a young girl can do with their lives is to kill a Jew and to die in the process. As long as this is going on, there is no prospect for peace. There is no diplomatic answer. There's no way to speak to people who are, who hold such ideologies. So I think the key is, and Morris, you and I have spoken about this before. The key is to go in there and change their indoctrination, to change the textbooks, to change the school systems, to change whoever is to change the law, basically to revoke paper slate, etc., etc. And I think from the moment that we start doing that, you can start counting about 20, 25 years, and only once a whole generation of Palestinians is educated on something other than hating and killing you, then there might be a diplomatic solution in the horizon. Not before that.
Our time has unfortunately run out. One quick positive message before we leave.
I'm very optimistic currently, and I'll tell you why. And people are shocked when I say this. I'm optimistic because I've been dealing with this for so many years, and we were alone in this. People could not see. They couldn't see, the hatred, that the indoctrination. They couldn't see the Iranian, ring of fire around Israel. They couldn't see the forces of anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitic forces in Western countries, in college campuses, and in other places. They couldn't see it, but they can see it now. And so now that we have a larger army as we ever had, a lot more Israelis, a lot more Jews are calling me every day to say, what can I do to help? There are so many new initiatives. Even people that are not Jewish from different countries are saying, oh my God, if we don't do something and we don't do it now, all is lost for us in our countries. And so they want to work together. They want to cooperate. So, as hard as it is, and it's definitely an uphill battle, I am a lot more optimistic today than I was on October 6th. And I really want to invite every single person who is watching this, join the fight, join the fight. Take it, to your home, to your school, to your neighborhood, social media. Send us a message saying how I can help. I mean, every single person here is an important soldier in this army for good, and I think we're on the right path.
Amazing. I think that we have to be partners in that idea of the optimism going forward. That is certainly, I think, something which Israel has been projecting for a very long time, and it's just a shame that it took the murder of 1,200 people in order to achieve both our internal unity and for the wider international community to understand the dangers that these terrorists pose. And what you can do is, in order to really be recruited into that world of understanding and to be an ambassador really for Israel, you can go onto the JCPA.org. That's our website. You can see almost 100 different podcasts that we've had since the beginning of the war. We started already on the 8th of October, all the way through analysis from almost 360 degrees to try and get a better idea of what's going on. Obviously, we've missed Shabbatot and Fridays, but so we're almost at 100 programs, and that you can see there. You can join us through our site. There's a link there to the daily War Room update, to the Zoom link, and you can also go onto our YouTube channel and subscribe and join and follow us there as well. There's also, for those of you who can, a donate button there as well. The JCPA functions solely on donations, so any donation, small is already considered big because it's better than we had before. So please make that effort as well. And if you want to contact us just to get more information for background, for analysis, for anything that you don't find on our websites, on one of the websites that we've referred you to, please feel free to send me an email, Maurice, Maurice, jcpa.org, and I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible, and or send you to someone who can provide that information. People like Yifa, who will be inundated with your emails, I hope. And that's our message for this week. We will be back with you again on Sunday. No program tomorrow. Shabbat comes in early in Israel still. So we will see you again on Sunday. Until then, keep safe, and we will see you and have a good Shabbat. Goodbye.
Shabbat shalom.